Hi, I'm Steph Ritz, and welcome to day 2 of our 10-day Stories That Sell video challenge. Today's question is, when did you become your own hero? Now, when I think of this question, there are so many different tales that I can tell, but the one that came forward today is really about that moment when I became an advocate for my then boyfriend's father. He had been in a motorcycle accident where he was rear-ended by another motorcyclist and was in the ICU with a bunch of broken bones. And I'm going to skip over a bunch of the details for those that are somewhat squeamish, but he needed someone to be there speaking on his behalf because he was doped out of his brain, so he wasn't feeling the pain. And his wife, my boyfriend's mother, was afraid of flying and had a fear of travel altogether. In fact, my boyfriend hadn't even left the neighboring states around where we lived until we got together. I took him on his first plane ride ever as an adult. I mean, he had never been on a plane before. And so when her husband went on this road trip and then was so severely injured, she was adamant that no one was going to go be by his side and be an advocate for him in the hospital while he was in ICU, not even knowing if he was going to survive at that point. And I remember going over there, my boyfriend and I made the decision that we were going. I mean, I take road trips all the time. I took my first road trip about 2 months after I got my driver's license and drove my grandma, who had stroked out just a month before, drove her from Wisconsin to Florida on a cross-country trip because she was a snowbird and was done with the winter. So I'd always been a road tripper, and I'd been a caregiver for my own father, who I'd watched die 6 times and be brought back to life each time. For my mom as she died for cancer, for my grandma as she was passing away after 11 years of caring for her. And then to see my boyfriend's father in a space where no one was allowed to be there for him, and knowing that it was perfectly fine, perfectly safe for me to go, that her fears weren't going to stand in the way of me. And yet, at the same time, I had to face some of my own fears. I had been bedridden for about 1.5 years at this point, and I was somewhat afraid of hospitals because I had gotten so terribly ill when I was in one before with a combination of C. diff and shingles that knocked out my immune system. And I was kind of afraid of people. Like, at that point, I was still going to the grocery store and coming home with colds that were turning into infections and then being on it was just a mess, right? My body was just a mess. And so I had to not only get past her irrational fear of flying and travel, but I had to get past my fear as well. And can I tell you how glad I am to go out there? He had broken his hip, and they were treating the wrong side. So every single day that we were there, about a month that I lived in a hotel right outside of Yellowstone, he was getting worse every day. And it got to the point where it was a medical necessity to fly him out, but the insurance wouldn't cover it. He needed to go to a trauma center. I mean, we were like literally at the east gate of Yellowstone in the middle of nowhere, Cody, Wyoming, right? And insurance wasn't going to fly him to a trauma center unless we waited, and maybe they'd fly him to Trauma 1 eventually when there was an opening to one of the 3 trauma centers out there. So instead, we found a service called an Angel Flight, and they figured out a way for a low cost that they could cover it up front as long as we could prove to them that it would get covered on the back end. So pretty much we had to pay the upfront fee, and then the rest was covered by insurance if insurance covered it. And so, but insurance wouldn't cover it until doctors on both sides would verify that he needed actually to be moved and to get this service. And they didn't have that money. And so not only had I gone out there to be his advocate, but I put up the money to get him airlifted back to the trauma center. Guess what? I lived a block away from a Trauma 2 center. I purposely bought a house when I was a caregiver for my grandma around the corner from the hospital. So when the time came, I was there. And yes, the entire family, 13 people, 18 people, 18 people stayed at my house the night of my grandma's passing. And we all went to the hospital. We were all there with her at that same time. And it's the same hospital that he was airlifted back to. And of course, they deemed it medically necessary. And of course, they paid the bill and I got my money back. But what would have happened if no one had stood up for him? Now, I'd been an advocate throughout so many different areas of my life, but until that moment, I didn't understand the importance of it, that these were truly life and death things that I was standing up for and believed in and had no qualms. If I look at it, that was really the turning point for my boyfriend and I, because he wasn't even willing to stand up to his mother. And I realized that he was never going to stand up to her, and that the way that she treated others was based solely on her fears and not for the best intentions of the other person. And that wasn't something that I really wanted to be a part of for my life. But you know what? I ditched that boyfriend, and I still hear from his dad every single year, at least for Christmas. Just a hello and a grateful gratitude. Thank you for saving my life, because I don't know if I would be living without you coming for me. That is that moment when I was my own hero, when I faced down the fears of others, faced my own fears in order to show up and be there for those that I loved and those that love me. So, cheers to day 2. Can't wait to watch your videos. Again, when did you become your own hero?